Hey there, it's Liz from No Trace. I've been following the work of Lynn Carson Harris and been super inspired by her really pretty teeny tiny patchwork designs, which I'm showing you right here. And this weekend I decided it was finally time to try and recreate one of these teeny tiny patchwork pieces. So let me show you how it's done. In order to make this tiny pieced quilt panel, we're going to be using 1-inch squares of fabric. So these are pretty teeny tiny. This will be a lot easier for you if you have a quilting ruler and a rotary cutter. So I am using my long, thin scraps of fabric. Some folks call these strings. And I'm working in shades of yellow for this project, but you could definitely mix up the color scheme and work with the colors that speak to you. So I have 2 of my long, thin scraps here. I've just lined up the edges with each other, and then I'm going to fold them in half to make this cutting process go a little bit faster. And now I'm going to use my quilting ruler to measure 1-inch width here on my strip. So I'm lining up this 1-inch mark with the edge of the fabric. Can also use my cutting mat as well. And then I'm just going to cut this into a 1-inch strip. Save this for a different project. And then we're going to cut this strip down into 1-inch squares. And I'm going to get rid of this little edge here. And then I'm just going to go along measuring out 1 inch. So I'll be cutting 4 squares at once. The number of squares that you want to cut depends on how large you want to make your little panel. So I'm going to be making a panel that's about 3 inches square, and for that I'm going to need about 36 squares. If you want to make your panel larger, then you'll need more than that, obviously. I've got 36 squares cut out, and I took a moment and I arranged them in a very simple pattern, just alternating the yellows, the more solid yellows. Obviously, you could create a more elaborate pattern, or you could do something totally random. You do you. What I'm going to do next is place these in pairs, right sides together, just putting one on top of the other. And then I'm going to be taking these over to the machine, and I'm going to be sewing them together. Now I'm just sewing each pair with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, I have this very cute little chain of pairs, so I'm going to go ahead and cut them apart and get them back in a grid. Okay, I have all of my pieces back in that original grid, more or less, and I also went ahead and I pressed open the seams at the back. Next, I will start placing the pairs on top of each other and sewing together each of the rows. I do want to make sure that the seams of the pairs are lined up with each other when I go to sew. And once again, I'm going to be doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each of these little pairs of pairs. All right, I have my 6 little rows joined, and I've also pressed the seams on the back. Next, I'm going to be sewing each of these little rows together. So I'm going to be placing them with the right sides together, and I'm going to pin them so that the seams line up as closely as possible. Now, I am far from perfect, so the alignment is not going to be perfect, but I am going to use my pins to try to make it as close as possible. Once my rows are joined, once again, I'm going to sew them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, I have my strips joined together. So next I'm going to open them up And then I'm going to press the seams open at the back so that I can join my pairs of rows together. All right, last step, I'm going to be joining these 3 strips with each other in the same way, lining up the seams the best I can and sewing them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Are you ready for the grand reveal? I hope this tutorial inspires you to save your tiniest scraps of fabric and create something really special with them. I'm going to link to another tutorial right here that shows you one project to do with this teeny tiny patchwork panel.